Every life has a story, and every story is worth sharing. Your story, my story, and our story speak of victory and defeat, joy and sorrow, resilience and vulnerability. They are not just our story, they are Christ's story in us. They are Kingdom Stories from Down Under.
It's not often that you meet somebody who has emigrated twice, from Europe into Canada and then from Canada into Australia. Had to start all over again and reestablish herself and her family in a new land twice. And she battles on. She's a wife, she's a mother, and she's also a CEO, or was, but she carries on the good fight. And tonight it's a privilege and an honor to have with us at Kingdom Stories from Down Under, Anina Findling. Anina, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
My word, you've really traveled the world, haven't you?
Yep, you learn a lot.
Yeah. Initially, Holland or Germany?
Germany.
Germany.
Yeah, so I was born in Germany, and my parents both had to flee from the Russians in World War II.
East Germany?
Yep, so my mom was in what was Poland, and my dad was just south of Frankfurt.
Okay.
But yeah, there were aspects of war that affected both of them. And so yeah.
Where did they go?
They, so my mom was in Poland. She actually grew up in a castle, and it was a pretty lonely and cold life up there. But the Russians came, and they had to just 24 hours. They had to flee.
Yeah.
And so they both stayed then in West Germany.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, so they had their challenges, and I know that parents do the best that they can with the lives that they were given, and sometimes trauma carries forward. So yeah.
Siblings?
Yes. So I'm the youngest of four.
Beautiful.
So I had older twins. So,
boys or girls?
Yeah, so two older brothers, and I was the youngest daughter. And apparently the story goes that because I came after twins, I just was flying out of my mom. And so she was like, there was only a nurse at the time. I was just coming so quickly. And so the nurse was like, I can't, I'm not qualified to deliver a baby. And my mom was like, you're better than nothing. Stay here. She's coming.
No choice.
And apparently the nurse ran to get a doctor, but I just came flying out.
You were keen.
I was pushy and impatient right from the beginning, so here I am.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
I think this world needed you. You
Yes.
probably knew that the world needs you, so...
Well, yeah, I don't think there was a mold. I am a very unique person.
They threw the mold.
Yeah, if there was one. Yes.
If there was one.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Your parents in Germany, tough, obviously resilient, a lot of grit, overcoming all the challenges after the war, rebuilding their lives.
Yeah.
What were they doing? Your parents?
My dad was in upper levels of management in our family company, and so he was very consumed with work. And my mom was a socialite, and I was kind of raised by nannies for the first 6 years.
Okay.
My parents weren't around, so there were abandonment issues from the early years, and...
So who were these nannies? Who knows?
I don't even know.
Do you remember?
I remember pictures with them, and they were lovely people, but ultimately kids don't want stuff, and they don't care how wealthy you are. They just want a loving family environment. But yeah.
What's your first memory of childhood?
Yeah, I just remember just talking about the nannies. I remember the picture of the nanny, and the bullying started early, so a challenging environment with older brothers, and we had this little troop of German kids that were bullies around the neighborhood, and so that was a challenge for my childhood growing up. It started really early, and for me, even after we then emigrated, so I was 7 when we moved from Germany to Canada. And so there was about 10 years altogether of bullying and challenges in the school environment. And so that was something for me to work through.
Was it common?
Yeah.
In that environment?
Back then, there was no social awareness of bullying, and teachers almost encouraged it. They just,
Did you know at the time, or you didn't? At the time, it was just normal life?
yeah, as a kid, you don't know that
You just
this
fight
isn't
it,
what other
you
people.
carry on.
Yeah, you just carry on, and you just survival really. And
Have you had any eruptions in the sense, like, you know, fights, and where you gave as well, not just receive?
Well, that's an interesting one because I am a survivor. I have a strong personality, and you develop the resources for survival in life. And there's a point after which you just go, enough of this, and you start to turn, and you can kind of go from one extreme to the other. And you need God's grace to interrupt the broken cycles of life. And so, yeah, the good that is in my life is because of God. But yeah, I was a bit of a battler growing up. So I was 7 when we moved over, and an amazing thing happened to my whole family. We all came to know God within the span of 1 year, and because we weren't close, we all had our issues, and each was surviving in their own way. I was in Sunday school, and that classic Revelations 3 passage, which is often not ideally meant for evangelism. That one, yeah. It's meant for churches.
It worked.
It worked. And so I was a kid, I was told, you know, Jesus is on the other side of the door and the handle's on your side. And I was like, oh, this poor guy, you know, it's rude to leave someone standing. And so I opened the door at that time. I was 8, and but it didn't really make much of a difference. So there was a lot of conflict in my home, trauma and affairs, and the bullying at school. And by the time I was 16, I was a pretty angry young woman, and combined with having an older sister who was quite a rebel and who was quite strongly disciplined by my father, I watched that and I thought, you know, I don't want that. So I got to be a good girl to avoid that. And so I think
but
that's
on the inside.
Yeah, so I think that's what you call a passive aggressive, because on the outside I was really compliant and I was a good girl, and I learned to perform well in school and have good grades and stay out of trouble. But underneath there was all this turmoil and emotion building up, and but there were good memories too. We had a lot of outdoor activities we did as a family, and this was Western Canada that I grew up, and so we were close to the Rocky Mountains, and we'd go downhill skiing, and those were my best memories in my childhood, was the outdoor activities that we did together, whether it was hiking or biking or skiing, or and then in my teens I went horseback riding to this Christian camp. And it was actually at one of these camps that I had my first real encounter with God. The door knocking opening experience wasn't very much, it was just a polite invitation. It wasn't an actual experience. So when I was 16, I was at this camp, and there was this speaker this one night, and he was talking about the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And so I was like, wow, that sounds interesting. Give that a go. And he prayed over me, and it was just an amazing experience. The only way I can describe it is like a Holy Spirit shower. It was just this intense showering of emotion out and emotion in. And so I felt like God was washing a lot of this pain and anger and rejection and hurt and all that stuff, abandonment out of me, and instead he was filling me with the good stuff of his Spirit, just things that were completely foreign to me, just the love, joy, peace, the beautiful things of the Holy Spirit. And so they were teaching me about tongues, and all that came, and so that really was my first real encounter with God. And at the end of that week, they used to give these awards to campers for the most changed camper. Yeah. And I got the award because I was such an angry young woman when I came into camp. And at the end, you know, I was showing the fruit of the Spirit. They're like, wow, this girl.
It was that real.
It was that huge. Yeah, that tangible and visible.
And you knew it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was an unmistakable encounter with God. And so I would say that was my real conversion, And
you were 16?
16 at the time. Yeah.
So your parents migrated to Canada because they wanted a better life for you, for the future?
Yeah, so my dad had hit a leadership crisis, and he left the family company and came to Canada to start a new life.
Was it an escape in the sense from the pressure and stress?
Yep, yeah, he was high up in the corporate world, and in some ways I followed his footsteps, and really
It did him good
hard worker,
coming to Canada.
performance driven, and he had rural roots, and so he wanted a farm life, and he bought a farm.
So you guys moved to Canada on the farm?
We lived in the city because my mom didn't want to live out on the farm, but we went there every weekend, and it was 480 acres. It was a huge prairie farm, no running water, electricity when we bought it.
So what was there?
Not much. A little cabin in the woods, and in the winter.
So what could you farm there?
It was land that my dad leased out for the neighbors to have pasture. Yeah, and so he, it didn't have a lot of income. It was more like a hobby farm.
Yeah.
And my dad kind of used us as slave labor, and learned a lot of things, how to swing a hammer and put up barbed wire fencing, and there wasn't much time for play. It was hard work, and even we had this cottage in British Columbia that we'd go to in the summer, and even there, it was just this industrialness of Germans, we just hardly a spare moment. We would plant trees and cart bucket loads of water from the lake to water these trees, and there's a lot of work and industriousness. So I learned how to work hard and
muscles. Respect trees and
tough
houses.
Skinned. Yeah, it was good. So there was good aspects of it. I loved to breed.
Build the family together as well. The unity in the family.
We were not close. There was a lot of conflict. There was 6 of us, each of us with a strong opinion, and my favorite world was reading. So I would escape into the world of Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys, and books were my world.
And 3 brothers?
Sanctuary. Sorry about my brothers?
What was their escape?
I don't know.
Outdoors, plays, games?
Yeah,
sports.
They loved Mark Twain books and Cowboys and Indians, that stuff in the earlier years. And all of us loved to read. And music was our big thing as a family. We didn't do sports and teams or anything like that. Classical music was a big thing. So we all had a classical instrument. So I played the piano, and my brothers and my sister, they all had violin, viola, cello, and they'd often play quartets. And they were in youth orchestras, and I ended up studying music therapy and playing piano in university. And
so it was a central part of your life.
Yeah, music was really something that bound us together when they made music.
So were you in Vancouver?
No, I grew up in Alberta, and so this cabin that I speak of was in British Columbia. It was a 13-hour drive from where we lived in Edmonton, Alberta.
People don't realize how big Canada is.
Yeah, very big country. We love to go there in the summer, in the very short Canadian summer.
Yeah, 2 weeks.
Yes, if you're lucky. If it rains, you feel really ripped off. But short summers, lots of snow in winter. But skating, tobogganing, you do all the winter sports.
Different.
Cross-country skiing.
So what university did you go to?
So I had wanted to study music therapy in university, and the only degree program was in the Eastern States. And so I left, actually in between there, at 17 I left home and never moved back again. So I was always a pretty independent young woman.
But you stayed in town?
No, I moved across. Well, at 17 I went to Youth with a Mission. So I actually studied with YWAM and did a discipleship training school, and I went back to Germany for that.
Nice.
So spent a year in Germany with YWAM and on outreach to Africa.
So you bilingual, strongly bilingual.
Yeah.
You didn't lose your German at all.
My parents kept it up, so to speak. Yeah.
Were you reading as well in German? Or
I can read, write, speak. I prefer English. I was 7 when we moved to Canada, so I'm more comfortable. But I'm still fluent, and still when I speak to my mom, my dad's passed away a few years ago, but when I speak to my mom, it flows in and out of English and German. We don't even notice. And
beautiful.
Yeah, so whichever word comes more quickly in terms of either language.
So from YWAM, you came back to Canada?
So then, I went to Eastern Canada and studied music therapy, and that's where I met my husband. So after
How far east?
Ontario, so close to Toronto. I studied in
Waterloo?
Kitchener-Waterloo, and he was from Cambridge. So we met. I heard you in some of your other series talking about different parts of Canada, and so we met on a youth mission trip. So not Youth with a Mission. This was a youth mission trip. This was a Christian organization that took university students through different parts of Canada and the US. And then my last trip, my fourth one, was to Panama, Central America. So we traveled together. And
he's
churches.
German as well, or Dutch?
Yeah, he was born in Canada, but to German family. So his first language was German.
Was that helpful in your relationship, you think?
Yeah, I think marriages are challenging as they are. Cross-cultural marriages would be that much more challenging. So having that similarity, he speaks German and not quite as fluently, but when we didn't want our kids to understand what we were saying about them, we talked in German to each other. And
so you didn't teach your children German?
Yes, they did learn bits and pieces, and then in high school they studied German. So that was an easy language to study rather than French, starting from scratch. So after all, they were pleased that they could understand what we were saying about them. So I couldn't get away with it so much anymore. But it's great having that common cultural background.
So you're in Panama. Is that where you met him, or?
No, I came back from Panama, and 3 months later we got married. After that was my last trip, and then we did.
How did that happen? You don't just get married.
Yeah, so we.
So by this, you were in Waterloo now, doing university, and where was he? He was in Cambridge.
Yeah, so he graduated. He's 5 years older, and so he had graduated 4 years prior from University of Waterloo.
So you started
he did engineering.
Seeing each other in that area?
Yeah, so we met through the missions group. Yeah. So that was great to have that common, not only cultural background. So he came to you. He'd
come to you on the weekends to see you, or how did the friendship?
We always had a long distance relationship, and I had this
phone calls.
Lots of phone calls, and I had this naive prayer. It was funny because I'd been on YWAM and so many Christian mission groups. One of the acronyms, the fun acronyms for YWAM, is Young Women After Men.
I like that. I'm going to use that.
Another one is Youth Without Any Money. So both are pretty true. And love YWAM. They're amazing. Still have such a heart for their ministry. So we had met, but had spent most of the time apart. But because I'd spent so much time on ministry teams, it's inevitable. Like when you go to Bible college, checking each other out. You have this tick list of who you're looking for, and kind of go, oh, he's got these and these pros, and no, the hair or whatever, the background can't do that.
I wouldn't make the list with my hair.
I had actually prayed that God help me to not be attracted to my future husband, because I just want to be friends. I want to be myself. Yeah. And God answered that prayer and then some. Like, we were really close friends for a long time. We were best friends, and still to this day, I say to our
I pray
young adult
you'll
kids,
get attracted to your husband now.
Well, it did happen, trust me. But I say to them, the best foundation for a great marriage is friendship. We're still best friends. We're almost 30 years married now. Yeah. Coming up to 30 years. And we're still best friends.
That's beautiful.
And that's the best basis for a marriage. We've always told our young people that. And so the chemistry came, but it took a little while. And people were like, what's wrong with you guys? You have everything in common. You've got the cultural background, and you both love God, and you've been on mission trips. Like, what are you waiting for? And but then God.
How did he propose?
That's a long story, but it was a divine encounter where I had known before he did that this is the man God wanted me to marry, and so I kind of held on to that word and prayed through that, and I was waiting and waiting and waiting, and I'm like, God, what if he doesn't hear you? What if he's not listening? And so I had to trust God and trust him and let that go. And God worked very miraculously. Harry's a deep man of faith, and God answered his prayer. His dad had said to him, the day I married your mother, I knew that's without a doubt what God wanted me to do. And he's like, I want that. I want to know through thick and thin. That's my insurance policy, that this is the woman I'm meant to be with. And sure enough, God gave it to him in a really miraculous way. Woke him up at night and just gave him a scripture reference, and he looked it up in the Psalms, and it was, even at night my heart instructs me. And then the second night he woke up, okay, God, if that was you, he's got a bit of a Gideon spirit, he puts the fleece out, okay, God, if that was you, tell me again. And the next night God woke him up again, and he flipped prior in Psalms, and he guides the humble in what is right and instructs them in his way. And here's a very humble man, and that was it. It's that he knew that he had to find me and propose to me. And I had gone south to Florida in reading week, as Canadians do. They urgently look for warm weather. And so he had to find me, and it was a crazy needle in the haystack search, and he found me.
He went to Florida to chase you?
Yeah, he didn't know where I was, and it was a crazy story, but he found me the night before.
He drove? Or
he flew, but we had driven, so 4 of us girls.
Fort Lauderdale?
Close to there. So we just drove through the night as university students do. We take turns sleeping.
Yeah.
And,
we've done that.
Yep, just 24 hours, just power through.
Snow still on the car.
Yeah, and it just gets warmer and warmer as the further you drive south. And so he found me in Florida. It was an absolute miracle, and he proposed in front of my friends, and we had play-by-play pictures of all of it, because it was just a crazy supernatural story that led.
Did you just say yes, or you held him?
Well, yeah, he was just rambling through of how God had worked in the last week miraculously to find me against all odds, and then God told me to go to Florida, propose to Anina, and then I went right, and I'm like, wait, back up, what? And he's like, oh yeah, will you marry me? And I'm like, yeah, okay. And so then I kissed, and then he kept telling the story. So he pulled out the ring, and even the way he found the ring, and got time off work when nobody else could, and it was a divine intervention, and kind of a cool story.
Beautiful. That is very, very uplifting and beautiful.
So then we were blessed with.
So you were married in what kind of church? Methodist church, Reform?
We went to a Mennonite Brethren church, actually, and so it was not the Amish Mennonite. It was because it was Eastern Canada, but it was the Mennonite Brethren, more contemporary denomination. And
both of you were in the same church?
Yeah, so then we got married, and we've had quite an interesting background of a range of churches. I grew up in a Spirit-filled Anglican church, so that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Cool combination of the Common Book, Church of the Prayer Common Book, and also the Holy Spirit and the charismatic elements in the Anglican church. It was fascinating, and then we met in the Mennonite Brethren church, and then God had us go to Vineyard Church, and that's right when the Toronto Blessing hit.
So you were in a Vineyard Church in Canada?
In Cambridge, and ours outside of Toronto when that happened, and so that was a worldwide phenomenon, and amazing things
You know
happened.
that I pastored a Vineyard Church here in Perth, Churchlands.
No, I didn't know you were pastor there. Cool.
Yeah, you've heard of Churchlands?
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
So before I established Menorah, I was the executive there for 3 years.
You might have said something about that. Yeah, cool.
So we were part of the Vineyard.
Okay.
I mean, they were part of the Vineyard before me. But
and I loved, with my music therapy background and the music, the Vineyard worship. This was long before Hillsong, and I just bought every album, and I lived and breathed the Vineyard worship music. I loved it.
Great.
Yeah.
Wow, small world.
Yeah, it is cool. So, that was pretty huge, experiencing that whole phenomenon when it hit, being in a Vineyard church, when that people coming from all over the world, and then taking the spark home and experiencing God in similar ways all over the world in the way that they'd experienced God in Toronto. And it was pretty eye-opening, and learned a lot about the power of God and not putting God in a box. So that was 3 years at a Vineyard Church, and then we felt called to travel. My husband and I love to travel, and so we spent 13 months going through 26 countries in the world. So we backpacked through 26 countries, and
no kids at this stage.
Not at that point. No, we've done 2 world trips in our lifetime. So the second one was when our kids were 12 and 14, and I had long service from work, and we took 4 months to travel across 4 continents. And so we did it in a bit of a more comfortable style. Back when Harry and I did it was just backpacking and
rough.
Yeah, just good. Roughing it. We would just look enviously at restaurants, and we'd just be eating, in Rome and Italy, we'd just buy, plain bread, pizza from the stand, the vendors, and just, really, really basic rough backpacking. But through that, we came through Australia and fell in love with it. And Harry had been to Australia before then, and knew that was home, and was hoping that God would also confirm that call. And sure enough, then when we came through Australia, we were like, this is it. This is the end station to the bus stop where we want to get off and hopefully finish up
So
here.
Towards the end of your trip, you came to Australia?
Yep, so we traveled through, and that was one of the 26 countries, and just fell in love with Australia, and then went back and immediately applied to immigrate.
Okay.
And
you chose Perth?
Yes, chose Perth. But
Why
we
Perth?
were denied the first time, so we're just so disappointed.
Why Perth?
Just connected with our soul. It was...
You had been in Sydney, Melbourne?
Yeah, so we bought, as backpackers do, we bought a van and fitted it out with a band and drove across 16,000 kilometers with an old van that burned a litre of oil every 100 kilometers, and you had to crank the seat and put the oil in, and we just bottles of oil in the back of the van, and that's how we drove across Australia.
More oil than fuel, almost.
And we got to know this country that we love, but Perth was it. It just hit home, and we've always really felt called here. We've been here almost 20 years, and this is it. The call is very strongly to Perth.
Okay. So the first time you get knocked back.
Yeah, so we applied to immigrate, and we just felt this call so strongly, and Harry and I really prayed through every major life decision together, and the unity and hearing God together is really important to us, and so we were just so unmistakably on the same page. We applied to immigrate, and they had these immigration rules that within the last 12 months of travel, you have to have 13 months of work experience, and Harry had been an engineer for 10 years, so he had no shortage of work experience, but because we had traveled for 13 months, we were that month short, and they knocked us back, and we're like, bureaucracy, this is not right, we're cold there, and we were so disillusioned. We were just like, God, there is no plan B. And so we were in Ontario at the time, where I'd studied in university, and then this company headhunted him for working as an engineer in Alberta, and ironically back to in the exact same city where my parents were from. And so I had moved away from home. I was this independent spirit that had launched into the world. I was never looking back, and God said, come back here for a bit. And so it was an amazing time, actually, where we tried to say no to this headhunter, and he just kept offering more money, and it was just unmistakable that, okay, we got to go to Edmonton, and what are the chances, man? This is the city where my parents are from. And so we went back to Edmonton and did 3 years there, and then 3 years to the day, because he had told them, listen, I'm applying to immigrate. This is where we're going. We're going to Australia. And they said, just give us a year, and we really want you. And as long as you give us a year, you can go to Australia whenever you want. So we gave him 3 years, and then on the day of being there 3 years, we applied to immigrate again, and then we got in the second time. But in the meantime, I reconnected with my parents, and God knew. Even the will of God has the timing of God that is so key to it. And now looking back, we were so glad that God's timing was better than ours, and really bonded back. And there's a lot of healing between myself and my parents, and my mom really helped me because my kids were a year and a half in age, and they were pretty intense.
They were born there.
Yeah, so in Ontario before we left, I'd had my son, and then my daughter was born in Alberta in that 3 year time. And so because they were a year and a half there, it was pretty intense, and I'm not very domestic, and so
having mom around was good.
Yeah, she was great. So she really helped me out a lot. I really got close to her, and we've been close ever since. So there was a lot of healing in that time.
And Dad?
Dad softened a lot with age, so he was a very authoritarian German when we were young as a family, but he really experienced the grace of God later. And again, there was a lot of healing and reconciliation and a lot of grace in his life, and he passed away in 2016. At the end of his life, he said the words to me that every daughter longs for, I'm just so proud of you, and I love you, and it was a beautiful ending, a difficult beginning, but a great ending. And those years were really precious that I spent with my parents in Alberta before we then flew to Perth, our beloved city, and we've been here ever since.
Wow, that's amazing. What a journey.
Yeah.
What a journey.
So then when we came here, we thought, well, we'll both look for work in our respective fields. Harry was a bit over the whole engineering thing, and I was chomping at the bit to explore the professional world a little bit, and I had started in banking in Canada.
Yes.
So we're like, okay, we'll both put our resumes out there and see what nibbles we get on the fishing line first. Yeah. And so I went in the yellow pages, as you did back then before internet, and just looked up.
You let your fingers do the walking.
Yeah, that's it. Yep. So I tried different banks, and one of the big four snapped me up.
Yeah.
And so I started as a relief teller, worked my way up through the ranks in banking, and what turned out from 1 year as a Mr. Mum role exchange turned out into 18 years, where God just kept giving me opportunity after opportunity in the banking world, and just promotion after promotion, and doors kept opening, and we'd keep checking in with each other. You still good to stay home? Yep. I'm still good to keep working. Yep. It works.
So he stayed home with the kids?
Yeah, and he did an amazing job.
Oh,
and
wow.
he was way more patient and present, and he invested invested into them, and our kids are amazing young adults that love God, and they just have a fantastic work ethic and deep godly character, and couldn't be more proud of them, and that's a lot of thanks to him and his parenting. He did a great job, and so it worked well. So if it ain't broken, don't fix it, was one of his sayings. So we kept going, and so I worked my way through the ranks in banking and
What church did you connect to here?
So for 18 years we went to Mount Hawthorne Baptist Church, and
so
again...
you didn't go to a charismatic vineyard or anything extreme?
No, nothing extreme.
You settled back into a conservative church?
Yeah, it was not a very traditional Baptist church. They had really moved it and grown it to be relaxed on the edges, so to speak. So we really enjoyed that fellowship, and that's where our kids got to know the Lord, and my husband was an elder for I think 11 years, and so we served in various aspects of leadership there, and enjoyed that.
Wonderful.
While I was working my way up through the corporate world, and through my background, I had back to the compliance and the performance bit. I had learned to work really hard, and the corporate world loves it when you're a performer, a performance addict, an approval addict, and you're just driven, and they just spin the wheel faster, and you're like, how fast can I run? How high can I climb? And I was determined to climb that ladder, and I just kept working my way up through, and then after 5 years as a bank manager, I was getting pretty exhausted, and my kids were approaching high school, and I was like, I'm spending such long hours away from home. This is crazy. I'm missing this narrow window of opportunity of really just making sure that I had that bonding with my kids, and I was kind of praying for an avenue out, and I had been introduced to the board of Baptist Financial Services. That's when I started being a director on not-for-profit boards, and while I was working in the bank, I was working for the financial arm of the Baptist movement.
Yes.
So I started as a director on their board at a time when I had no idea what directors did, and but I was flying out to Sydney every 2 months and balancing family and bank management and learning how to be a director, and but then the relationship manager for Western Australia, part-time role, resigned or retired, and I was like, that's my ticket out of the corporate world, and that's when I kind of then went into not-for-profit, and I just felt like the world completely slowed down, and it was a great thing, and never regretted it.
2 days a week or 3 days a week?
It was 4 days a week, but 9 till 3. So that was just so easy. I just
you could do the kids
couldn't believe my luck.
Almost.
It was just so cruisy after really long days in management.
And no pressure. You knew exactly. I mean.
Yeah, I felt like a time warp. Time slowed down. I felt like I was moving through quicksand. Things moved so slowly in that environment. I was just like, wow, there's no rat wheel anymore. This is great. So yeah, that was really good, and I really felt called to the not-for-profit sector since then, and so I started serving on not-for-profit boards, and then after working with them for almost 7 years, because it was part-time, I was able to explore more experience on boards, and that's when I got introduced to the board of Esther Foundation.
Yes.
So I started in May 2019. I served on that board. I first got introduced to help them with their board governance.
Yes.
And so that's how I got introduced.
So for those people who don't know what Esther Foundation does, can you briefly expand?
So I, by nickname, I kind of called it a Christian YWAM rehab. So it's like YWAM because that was my background for young women, but it's a really intense environment where the official term for it is it's a recovery and reintegration program for young women from crisis backgrounds. So they're in the process of getting their rehab accreditation, but it is an empowerment program for young women to come out of addiction and trauma and abuse backgrounds, to find God, and through a holistic framework completely turn their lives around. So we had therapeutic services and everyday programs and groups and workshops for them, and work experience and educational training programs, and average length of stay was 18 months to 2 years. And so it's for young women ages 14 to 38, and it is an incredible program. It really transforms lives, and the young women's stories that you read on their website, and whenever these young women share, people are just mesmerized by the power of God, and the transformed lives are just amazing. The darkness to light, the radical transformation is truly amazing.
And you went one step further than just being on the board.
So yeah, there was a lot of work to be done. It had been a real home-based Christian ministry, kind of a home. Yeah, it was started in various houses in South Perth Como areas, and then the government helped support it and bought land. Department of Communities bought land in Kalamunda for it then to become a huge organization that really grew really quickly, and it moved out to a converted Catholic convent in Kalamunda.
Yeah, beautiful
and
place.
A huge property, and my husband's still a property manager there, and it's a lot of work. Huge property. And it was an amazing project. We were kind of mum and dad there for a while, and
so you became the CEO.
Yeah, so when it was realized how much work it took to then professionalize everything from a home-based ministry to more of a professional ministry structure with all the back
Don't
end
call it an institution.
needing policies and procedures, and we were starting to get federal funding.
Yeah.
You just have to have all the compliance and
course.
regulatory framework for that, and because I had a corporate background, I was able to set
Put
that
that into
up.
place.
And so I spent a really intensive year and a half as CEO to bring in all the back end and professional systems and Microsoft Office Suite, and we had an operations manager that did that, and really proud of where we got it in a really short time. Yeah.
So who filled your shoes at the moment?
So there is it's current transition. Someone else is being appointed. We don't know yet. That hasn't been announced.
Yeah.
So I had a second in charge there who's an interim leader at the moment.
Yeah.
So that was less than 2 weeks ago.
I was just going to say, is Colossal still going on? They had a ministry called Colossal or in Subiaco, or was that not part of Esther House?
Nope, not Esther House. No.
They were creative, doing some graphic works and videos.
They might have assisted with the original website, and then we had other...
Yeah, okay. No. I thought some of the girls from there actually ministered at Colossal. Amazing testimony with Esther House, because there's so much going on, and we've got a few houses here in Perth for both men and women. Yeah. And everyone knows Esther House. Yeah,
it started out as Esther House, and now it's Esther Foundation, but it was, there's a lot of a sentimental attachment in calling it, still known to many as Esther House.
Were you emotionally attached to that ministry as well?
Yeah, it was really,
it grows on you, doesn't
really
it?
hard. Yeah, it really grows on you. The girls grow on you, and it was really hard to see that season come to a very quick close.
Was it your choice?
It was a combination of things, but it just became quite apparent that my investment was coming to a close.
Are you a settler, or are you more of a pioneer?
Yeah, I'm a pioneer. I'd have to say that God has gifted me with courage to go into difficult entrepreneurial places, and it was really difficult. It was a really challenging year and a half, and anyone that works with trauma recovery and rehab work knows that it's a very intense ministry environment.
Because I think the policy side wouldn't have been difficult for you doing it in the office, but it was more the interaction with the peers, and also with the board and with the staff and with the girls. Yeah, that would have been a massive challenge, wouldn't it?
Was so multifaceted, and that's why I did feel really uniquely called there for that season, in terms of the combination of business and corporate, where you needed to professionalize things, but also pastoral and spiritual. I was kind of a jack of all trades in terms of pastoring and mothering and doing spiritual nourishing and transformational work at the same time as doing compliance and policies and procedure oversight. And it was a pretty challenging
What has it done in you?
That's a really interesting question. I think because the finishing season was so recent, I think I'm still processing what it's done in me. I think it's softened me. I think it's humbled me a lot in just seeing the work of God through brokenness. And, it's really humbling when you've got a resume that you keep climbing, and then all of a sudden you have this quick finish that you weren't expecting, and you really have to see a new reliance on faith and not on your own performance. And so God rattled my cage a little bit in not leaning on my own strength and my own capabilities and performance, but really looking deep to his purpose and seeing faith in amongst the brokenness where you don't always have all the answers, and letting him use brokenness in a way that he shines differently through than strength. And so that's a season I'm still working through.
What surprised you in this year and a half? Because I mean, I can't even call it a job. I think it's a ministry. Surely the salary wasn't to the level of your
No, of course.
CV.
No money can pay for can compensate for the challenges you go through. There's any job that would have paid better and would have been much easier. So you don't do it for the money, you do it for the calling. And I definitely felt called, and my husband also felt called, and it was a real privilege to be able to do that together, because it's such an intense world. You can't describe it to someone on the outside. No,
it's another world.
It is a whole nother world. It is like a cross-cultural ministry. I was telling churches, if you can't go overseas during COVID, just go to Kalamunda. It is a cross-cultural ministry. It is a really
even on the
intense
streets.
Yeah, it is. Intense. And so I think something that I've learned through that is just the urgent need for discernment in spiritual ministry, and how I would define discernment through what I've learned rather than just a textbook answer is that the radar in your gut, that just is not something that you understand. It's a really deep intuition. And I would just when in the last month, when a lot of things were beyond my own understanding, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 just spoke to me in a totally different way, where don't lean on your own understanding. And I would actually say discernment is the difference between trusting in your understanding and trusting in your rational common sense versus trusting your gut. And one of my favorite authors is Joyce Meyer, and the battlefield of the mind, right? And that's where the attack is. That's where the battle is in the mind. And so that is a tough battlefield to navigate, whereas your spirit is that core part of you that's reserved only for God's spirit, right? As children of God, only God's spirit can inhabit that, but it is so tricky to tune into that. It's that gentle whisper sometimes, and you'd love it if it came as a storm, but it's like that gentle whisper that you really have to work hard to maintain that intimacy with God, to tune into that quiet whisper. And so just maintaining my intimacy with God through that time of ministry was really, really important. And just one of my biggest lessons that I've learned through this season is there's just the important need for spiritual leaders to use discernment in ministry and not lean on your own understanding. There will be crucial intersections in your ministry where everything will seem rational and your mind will be screaming, this is logical, what is your problem? And your gut, or else it's a unity thing between you and your spouse, or there's not quite the unity between you and your leadership team. Something's just a bit off. And there's that radar in your gut that's just going, wait, something's not quite right.
Discerning in the spirit for leaders.
It is so tough.
Powerful.
It is so
in
tough.
fact, you sometimes think, how else can you be a spiritual leader without discerning in the spirit?
And I think we're coming into a time, I think we're heading into really intense spiritual days where, even the elect will be deceived if that is possible.
Yeah. You will be tested. It's not like you won't.
We know the enemy has a mandate for Christian leaders and churches. And if you do not discern carefully and maintain unity in your leadership team carefully, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. These are challenging times. And discernment, that Hebrews 5:14 has just been ringing in my spirit. Solid food is for the mature, who by reason of use and practice have had their senses trained to discern good and evil. And That's why elders need to be older elders sometimes, because it's only by reason of use, and that practicing through life, I thought that was God, and I screwed up, that wasn't quite right, and that one was God and it didn't make any sense, but that rung true, and yes, God, that was you. And you learn. It's like recognizing your friend or some loved one over the phone. Listening to God's voice can be so tricky to hear, and that's one of the first things they teach in YWAM. They get you to read Lauren Cunningham's Is That Really You, God? Right? Learning to listen to the voice of God and discerning that. And that's where marriages are so key, that Harry and I never do a decision or move forward without unity. That just praying together is one of the biggest blessings in a marriage you can have, is checking for unity on that front. And for leadership teams, if you don't have unity, don't proceed. If you have that check in your spirit, wait until you have complete peace and that release. That's so key.
That's powerful. What's next for Anina?
Well, I think, as I updated my LinkedIn profile, I am going back to why I was called to the Esther Foundation profile to start with. Now you can see, Natanael searched your LinkedIn profile. That
are you in a pro? Are you in a professional?
It tells you when someone searched your profile. I'll know when you go for it. But I think I have a passion for governance, and it sounds like one of these really boring things when I tell people that I serve on boards. You can just almost see the yawn on their face.
It's because they haven't done it. Most people haven't.
It's a very specific
and
calling.
they don't understand. It's because they think, why would you go for those 3-4 hour meetings in the middle of the evening?
How boring is that?
And then drink coffee and then headaches and
when
concerns.
You talk about governance just sounds so dreary, and constitutions just sound like dry beef jerky that you eat on a survival trip only when you're absolutely on death's door. These are all kind of like dry topics, but for me, just through some of my learning lessons of the last 10 years serving on boards, it just that the governance is so important for directors to get right, and the charity sector needs a lot of training to make sure that those that are kind-hearted and compassionate and mission-driven also have that understanding of understanding the governance aspect of the rules under which you operate, and leading well, leading diligently. That's kind of a passion of mine. So where I can serve and perhaps do some consulting for boards to make sure that charities really have strong back ends to strengthen their mission and purpose on the front end.
That's beautiful.
Passion.
That's your passion. Is that your legacy that you're building as well?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I was watching your podcasts, and after I was watching you ask that of others, I thought, wow, what is the legacy that I would say? And I would say, the title of the book hasn't been determined yet. Not that anyone would write a book, but, figuratively speaking, it's still got a few more chapters in me. So I think the current chapter that I'm on would read leaders needing to discern and boards needing to govern well, and so that's my current legacy that I'm working on.
I think we're going to call this podcast Discerning Leadership.
Yeah, that's it. That's a good one. Discerning leadership. Yeah.
Initially I was going to say Discerning in the Spirit, but then the leadership discernment came in, and the diligence came in, and I think leadership and discernment, they just go so well.
Yeah, and hearing the voice of God. Someone was encouraging us yesterday as a married couple. As long as I've known you and Harry, you guys listen to the voice of God. You seek Him at every key decision, and discerning the voice of God and bringing that into leadership to discern and listen well. That's what
It's massive noise out there, isn't it? We need noise cancelling
headphones
of some sort.
Put them on to block out the noise and
when people ask me that, you know what I say to them? I say, you're not going to hear God's voice in the middle of the day, or you're probably only going to hear it in the middle of the night when He wakes you up at 4 o'clock in the morning, at 3 o'clock in the morning. Don't turn on the other side. Just get up, get on your knees and listen, because He's got you then, and you've got it.
It takes discipline to really press through and
it's intimacy.
Block out the noise.
It's intimacy.
To keep cultivating that. There's just so many things that compete for our time, and notifications dinging at you all the time, and turning off the electronics and really trying to hear and listen and go deep in Scripture to hear and discern beyond.
It's interesting because even with phones, they believe that adults are worse when it comes to phones than teenagers. Everybody, says that teenagers have problems with their phones. It's their parents, apparently, who have more of an issue.
The addiction is real, Natanael. The addiction to those numbers increasing.
You're telling me it's
ding,
like,
ding.
why under my pants?
I'm looking at you, man.
Shaking in any shape or form. Because normally, you can't sit here for an hour and not get notifications.
I know. You're thinking, what's going on over
it's
there?
Like,
I need to check my activity.
Dopamine.
How many
please,
likes
please.
does this podcast have? Yeah, I know. It is addictive. But it's the world we live in. And we can use it for good. As with anything, any tool, you can use it for good. But it can be really distracting. So honing back in and listening to God.
Biggest shock of your life?
Biggest shock?
Of your life. What really shocked you in life?
Wow, there's a curveball. I've had quite a few. I think even just immigrating is such a shock, the cultural shock. And so those were early year shocks. Getting married is a shock. Having kids is a shock. Going from corporate into not-for-profit is a shock. Yeah, one after the other. And you develop resilience through it.
Such a shocking life.
It is. Yeah.
Proudest moment for you?
Proudest moment. Yeah, I'd have to say giving birth to my kids. Back when I was climbing the corporate ladder and I was getting, that passion for success and all that, my mom said to me, the biggest thrill you can experience as a woman is to give, if you're blessed to be able to have a child. Naturally, the biggest thrill is becoming a mom. And I was like, old school, I kind of thought that was, it's for domestic women. But I'd have to say, in looking back overall, my learnings and experiences, my kids are my biggest pride, and doing it together with my husband, it's the proudest moment, is seeing the godly people they're becoming.
I think it's one of the greatest gifts that we have as humans, procreation. I mean, you think about, we partner with God in something that is so unique, into making more people.
It is.
It's just
making them godly people.
Yeah,
Anyone can procreate.
Massive responsible.
Stick them with junk food in front.
Responsibility.
Stick them with junk food in front of a television. Anyone can do that.
Yeah.
But to really raise them up in the ways of the Lord, to have godly character, who you are when no one is watching, and to really deeply love the Lord, to walk with Him, that is the ultimate challenge. And that's been our biggest joy, in seeing our kids really personalize their faith and walk with the Lord for themselves. That's a great joy.
Thank you so much. Really, really value you and appreciate you coming to the show on such short notice and just telling us who you are and what the Lord has done in your life. Really, really beautiful.
Thanks.
And discernment in leadership. Imagine that. Imagine if we had more and more discernment in our lives, in the way we make decisions, in the way we lead our families, our children. Amazing if, wouldn't that be amazing if we had more and more awareness of what's going on and what God wants us to do and how to act and how to behave and what attitudes to have. Well, I really played that the story inspires you and helps you tap more into what God is saying to you, so you can be assisted along the path in the Holy Spirit to make the best decisions and have that discernment. I'm sure you love this content, and we'd love if you rate us on the platforms that you're watching it, or you're listening to this, wherever you're consuming this content. Share it with other people, and come back next week. We're going to have new people every week at Kingdom Stories from Down Under. May the Lord bless you.
Thank you for joining us on Kingdom Stories from Down Under. We'd love it if you would subscribe, rate, and share these stories with your wider community. And remember, every story is worth sharing, including yours.